Hey guys, Bernadette here with Purpose in a Stitch, and today I'm going to be walking you through how to make the Pocket Shawl. I'm going to specifically be focusing on how we make the panels that make up the rectangle for our shawl. If you have any questions on making the cable pockets, I recommend hopping over to our website where you will find a link to how we work those cables flat. So to get started, I'm going to be grabbing my crochet hook. I am using a USL or an 8mm crochet hook for this pattern, and I am going to be using Lion Brand's newly re-released wool spun yarn. I've got 3 skeins in my main color and 3 skeins in my secondary color. For my main color I'm using burgundy, and in this tutorial I'm going to be using their taupe colorway. So to get started, I'm going to grab my tail of my yarn and I'm going to wrap it around my fingers to make a magic ring. I will not be going through a detailed explanation on how to make the magic ring in this tutorial, just because it's a pretty common technique. But if you do need additional help making the magic ring or a magic circle, I will link to a helpful video tutorial on our pattern page for this pattern on our website. From here, I'm going to single crochet 5 stitches into my magic ring. I'm going to pull close and I'm going to chain 4. I'm going to turn my work because we're going to be working in turning rows for this pattern. And then in my very first stitch, I'm going to be working a treble crochet. So this first section here is going to be our mesh, and this very first chain 4 is going to count as our first stitch and our first chain 1. And then we're going to chain 1, and in our next stitch we're going to treble crochet again, and we're going to chain 1 and treble crochet again. So that's 2 treble crochets, a chain 1 into 1 stitch, effectively increasing for this first row that we're making. Then we're going to chain again, and we're going to work a treble crochet in this center stitch, and we're going to chain 2. Now this is going to start the peak of our triangle, and we're going to treble crochet again in that same stitch, followed by another chain 1, and then we're going to treble crochet and chain 1 in this next stitch, and repeat that till we get to the very last stitch where we will again treble crochet, chain 1, and treble crochet. So we're at the last stitch here. We're going to again treble crochet and then chain 1 and treble crochet, which just makes up the mesh for our pattern here. And then we will turn our work and work the start of our moss stitch. But first we want to make sure we have the right amount of stitches. So for this first row we should have 20 stitches. So I'm going to quickly go through and count. Now our chains in between the treble crochets do count as a stitch, so make sure you're counting those as well as the very first chain and that very first treble crochet, and you should have 20 stitches. And then from here, like I said, we're going to turn, we're going to chain 2, and then in this very first chain 1 space we're going to start working our moss stitch. So we're going to insert our hook and single crochet, followed by a chain 1, and then we're going to work into each of the chain spaces till we get to that first chain 2 space by working a single crochet followed by a chain 1. And then when we get to that first chain 2 space, we're going to chain 1, work a single crochet into that chain 2 space, and we're going to chain 2, followed by a single crochet into that chain 2 space again. And then we'll repeat that moss stitch all the way back to the other end by chaining 1 and single crocheting. Now that chain 2 is important because that is going to make the shape for our triangle, so make sure you are working a chain 2 into those chain 2 spaces. Now make sure you work a single crochet into this last chain 1, followed by a chain 1 and a single crochet into the last chain of our very first chain space, because we are counting that as our stitches. And that will effectively complete that row, and we'll work 2 more rows of that moss stitch pattern. And we have a new addition to our row here where we had made where we had worked into that chain. So we're going to make sure we work our first single crochet into that first chain 1 space, followed by a chain 1, and again work into that chain 1 space from the previous row to make our moss stitch pattern. And then from there we're going to just continue making the moss stitch by single crocheting into each chain 1 space, followed by a chain 1 directly over our single crochet from the row previous. And we'll do that till we get to our chain 2 space right here, where we will work our increase of a single crochet, a chain 2, and then a single crochet into that same space. We're going to chain 1 right off of that and then work into the next chain space right next to that single crochet from the row before, and we'll continue that pattern all the way down. And the rest of this panel is going to essentially be us alternating 3 rows of moss stitch with 1 row of our mesh stitch. So make sure we work into the chain space here, because we do want to increase here on the end in order to keep our count correct, and that completes this row. So I'm going to turn my work, and you can see here that we have a triangle shape that is forming with our chain 2 space right there at the end, and we'll continue working our moss stitch. So I'm going to speed things up here, work my final row of moss stitch, and I'll go over another example on how to work that treble crochet mesh stitch once we finish this row. So you can see that overall these panels will work up fairly quickly, and they are pretty easy to make. So while this is leveled as an intermediate level pattern, it is pretty easy, and I would say that it's more advanced beginner. So I would say definitely give it a shot if you're a little hesitant. So now we're just going to chain 4, and again that's going to count as our first treble crochet in our first chain 1 space. And then I'm going to yarn over, and in this very first chain 1 space I'm going to treble crochet and chain 1. And from there I'm going to be skipping all of the single crochet stitches from the row previous, and I'm going to continue working a treble crochet followed by a chain 1 into the chain 1 spaces. So it mimics the moss stitch as to the placement of the stitches, but we're simply working a treble crochet instead of a single crochet, and that gives those gapping and that beautiful mesh kind of detail to our panels. So from there I'm just going to continue working that treble crochet till I get to that chain 2 space. I'm going to work my treble crochet followed by a chain 2 and another treble crochet into that space, and work that all the way down to the end of this row. And again we're going to want to make sure that we are working our last treble crochet into our very starting chain space from the row previous. And then from here I'm just going to speed things up to continue to grow our triangle, and I will join back with you guys to show you a little bit more close-up of the detail of this triangle. Okay, so I have completed a couple rows here. You can see the detail of the moss stitch and the treble crochet into the moss here, and I'm going to grow the rest of this triangle and move forward with how to proceed to our next triangle. So I've got a pretty good sample going here, and if we're making the center triangle or the first triangle, we're going to continue to grow along both edges here. But I am going to continue with the tutorial growing outwards in this direction to show you how to make those two ending triangles, or trapezoids if you will, on the other side of our shawl. So to get started, we're going to just turn our work, and we are going to continue working the same stitch pattern that we have here onto just one side of our triangle. So I'm going to start off by chaining 4, and I'm going to work my first treble crochet into my first chain 1 space, followed by chain 1, and I'm going to repeat that process of working my treble crochets into the chain 1 space until I get to the end of this side of my triangle, which will be the chain 2 space. So I'm going to speed things up since I've already shown you how to work these treble crochets into the chain 1 space. I'm going to speed things up until I get to the end of this row here. Okay, so I am here at my chain 2 space, and I'm going to work my final treble crochet into the chain 2 space, but unlike what we were doing before, we're just going to turn our work and we're going to continue working on just this side. So I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to continue by working my moss stitch into the chain spaces of this side of my triangle all the way across. And then for the rest of the pattern, I'm going to simply repeat this process of working the treble crochet and the moss stitch pattern for as long as we need on either side of our trapezoid. So I have a suggested length in the pattern, but grow yours as long as you want. If you're taller or shorter than I am, you might want your shawl to be longer or shorter than mine was. And I'm just going to continue to grow that, and then I will direct you to our blog post and our other video tutorials on our website for the cabling on the pockets and the blog post for assembly instructions. But you can see the final stitch that we have here, and I hope that you guys found this video tutorial for these squares helpful and that you enjoy your Try Pocket Shawl as much as I enjoy mine. Thanks for stopping by.